Welcome back. And during the break, we picked up a couple questions. Do we know where these are from, Kobe?
I don't.
Okay. The first question is, could you address the relatively new RBT status? I supervise 6 of these candidates. So once a person is RBT, that is, they're not training to be that, but they're in fact certified as a technician, behavior technician, then they would be in that type 1 situation where they require supervision, but they're not being supervised for their hours because they've already passed that part. Now, if they go to school to become a BCBA and they're trying to get those hours, then they would move into the type 2, so they're trainees, and so those rules would apply. And everything that I'm going to describe from this point forward about supervision certainly absolutely applies to RBTs. And then the second question is, in social work, there's a supervisory period after they become licensed. Do you think our field will do that? I would say probably not. There's too many other things that have to be worked out first before we would get to that stage. And part of that is that we would have to have the development of this new job position of a supervisor of supervisors. I'm sort of giving away what's coming, but we've already come up with a name for that. And we came up with this before this renegade taxi company came up with it. It's called Uber Supervisor. So far, I guess once this gets into print, they may come after us. I'm not sure, but we'll see. So I kind of doubt that that will come to our field. I think it could be, if it turns out that we have lots of violations by BCBAs and that they look like they're not taking their work seriously, that I think they could probably fall into that category of needing supervision. But it would be that'd be something in the field. The logical thing would be to look to the BCBA-Ds and have them get some kind of special training with regard to do that. But like I said, I don't see that happening. So in the course of working through this issue on supervision, one of the questions that I put to Yulima was, we keep talking about this and we want to come up with a behavioral version of supervision, but I think we need to capture what's going on right now. And let's just call it traditional supervision because it predates what we're going to be getting into. So I said, can you get a video of that? We started early on just because I couldn't envision what she was talking about, trying to capture as much of this on tape as we could, and it turns out that was a breakthrough. We didn't realize it at the time. But having it on tape so you can run it back and again and slow it down and listen to the audio and study what was said, those turned out to be really critical to understanding what's going on in terms of supervision. So she brought me this tape. I call it Let's Talk. She brought me this tape. The person, the supervisor in the tape, gave approval for us to use this tape. I want you to know that, because once you see it, you're going to say, what? So supervisor is on the left. The supervisee is on the right. The supervisee is a person who is in a master's program working toward her BCBA.
Saying a student that's new for Shannon in the classroom, and Shannon is having particular difficulties.
Can we make it any louder?
Her initials are, is it?
VC.
VC. Okay. So tell me.
There you go.
What's happening?
Pretty much, she won't do anything without a verbal prompt.
Okay.
So she'll wait. She knows a lot, and she'll understand, she can communicate, but she won't communicate without a verbal prompt.
Okay.
So she'll wait by the check-in board, knowing that she has to take off the visual, and she'll do it, but she'll put it back, because she wants you to say, check schedule, or take off.
Now, what happens if you give her only one direction?
One direction, she does it.
Okay.
So there are certain things that, you know, if it's stand up and come here, she'll stand up and come here.
Okay.
But if it's something like match, which she's done all the time, and she knows what she's supposed to do,
Mhm.
she won't do it unless you say match.
And how verbal is she?
Very.
So she understands exactly what you're
Mhm.
saying. What was the
So that's just a little piece of a supervision session. So what did you notice? I know it's a brief clip, but what did you pick up on that supervision experience? Let's start with where it was.
That's not where it works.
Yeah, this is his office, and she comes and talks. That's what we call it, let's talk. She comes and talks to him about her case. So, what do you think about that?
It isn't done in the setting where she should be practicing.
Right. Instead of her coming to him, he should be going to her. That's, to me, that's what behavioral, that's the beginning of a definition of behavioral supervision is it's done in the, wherever the place is that's going on. So, and then there's some other related issues connected with being in his office. So, how does he know anything about this client? There was no data presented. It's strictly her description of it. It could be. She's a nice person. I've met her. I believe she's honest, but it's still her version of what's going on, as opposed to his interpretation of what he's seeing and opportunity to ask questions and so on. And this sort of thing where the trainee describes a situation and receives feedback from a supervisor, the major problem with this is, besides the fact that he's not actually seeing it, is the nature of the conversation. So she's describing what she saw. And what's missing from a situation like that is people typically don't describe what they did wrong. Now, if you were watching somebody, you might, and you were taking some data, you might notice things that were wrong. But the person's not going to come in and say to their supervisor, you know, my timing is off. I know about 1 in 5 of the reinforcers I'm delivering is too late. Actually, it's so late that it actually becomes contingent on an inappropriate behavior. I know that. People don't do that. They talk about something else. People don't like to confess their training sins to a supervisor. But a good supervisor will know what those training sins are because the supervisor will be watching. So I think that this method of supervision, I won't do too much of this because you'll get sick of it, but air quotes supervision. This method of supervision, which I don't believe is, simply is a pro forma. It's we met and I signed the papers. Next week we'll meet again and I'll sign them again, or every other week, whatever it happens to be. We'll talk about things. So the supervisor doesn't really know. He asked some questions that made it clear that he had no foggy idea what was going on with this client. She did the best to answer the questions, but there's no behavior change going to happen here, I don't believe. I don't believe, as a result of something like this, even if it's every other week for a long time, that there's anything inherent in this situation that's going to cause her behavior to change. It looks too much like something else we know about that probably doesn't change behavior. Psychotherapy. This looks a lot like psychotherapy. People come to see their psychiatrist once a week, once every other week, and they tell their problems, supposedly, and the psychiatrist solves their problems, supposedly. But he never actually, or she never actually sees the stuff in the works, doesn't actually know the controlling variables. The person's not going to really tell the stuff. So I think it probably looks a lot like that. And other aspects of this, a kid gets in trouble at a school. We had one of our schools in Tallahassee handles kids that are quite disruptive kids, you know which one I'm talking about. Kid got in trouble, got sent to the counselor. A counselor's office was nice, fairly quiet. She had a little thing in the wall that made the room smell nice. Air freshener, I guess it was. It was kind of calm, and the kid could go there and whatever, and sounds like a nice reinforcer from the hectic classroom. My guess is that those visits don't change any behavior, and I don't think this does either. Questions, comments before I move on? Yes, Michael.
I think I would agree that the way that they're doing that right now is. Sorry, everyone on the line needs to hear you. No, that's okay. Maybe not. I would agree that the way that they're doing things right there seems completely useless. But had he gone out and then they were talking about what he saw and kind of shaping her language, how she was describing things, is an important skill for her to articulate in the appropriate jargon of the field to a supervisor is a skill that is beneficial in a lot of different contexts. Not just supervision, but meetings, talking with other professionals, those kind of things. So
Yeah.
You can't always do that as you're supervising, in vivo. You sometimes have to eject yourself from that situation and have those kind of conversations. So what they're doing, what they're doing right there seems a little bit useless, but I think there's a ton of benefit to didactic situations and coaching and those kinds of things that can happen after you do some more of the things that you just described.
Sure. If you want to shape on somebody's verbal behavior, I think that's probably okay. And if that's a target behavior is their verbal behavior, I think that's probably okay. But to suggest that you can shape on the verbal behavior and it's going to translate into a change in the motor behavior in another room, maybe across the city or something, I think that's a real stretch. Ultimately, I think I'd like to see is when you go to the JABA index and you type in supervision, there'll be lots of studies that'll answer questions like that. Is there generalization? Does this kind of, quote, supervision work to enhance a person's presentation skills, sense of ethics? I mean, I don't know. But I'd like to see research on all that stuff. I think it would be good. Anybody else? Okay, shifting gears for a minute. New topic. The ethics of supervision. The new Code of Ethics has the one that will take effect in January. It's been online now for a while. If you haven't downloaded it and marked it up and studied it and so on, now's a good time to do that because January is right around the corner. And one of the major changes to the code is the section on supervision. This afternoon I'll talk a little bit about some other things, but this seemed like appropriate to put this in here. So there's this new section and it has many subsets in there and they're very specific. There's some wiggle room on some of them. We'll talk a little bit about that. But at the 3-day meeting we had at ABBA a year and a half ago where we had a room all to ourselves and a dozen, 15 people sat around and argued about this for 3 days. A lot of this discussion had to do with lax supervision and what we can do about it. And that's where some decisions were made to put all this stuff in the code. So goes into effect in January. One thing to notice is that the old, what we were operating under before were called guidelines. And what we're operating under now, starting 2016, is code. The previous language was not a code because code implies enforcement. And there wasn't much in the way of enforcement. The board wasn't set up to do much in the way of enforcement except for really egregious cases. Under the code, the new code, and I would urge you to, like I said, look at that, study it, and so on. You particularly want to look at this section, and you want to look at section 10. This is new, and section 10 is new. And section 10 is a description of the actual operation of how the new code's going to work, where there is going to be a methodology there for less than these really egregious cases. Not minor cases, but cases that would not rise to the level. Before, the only way the board would take action is if you did something that was so egregious that it was a threat to somebody's life or a threat to the field. And so, every year maybe 10 people would have a certification pulled, something like that. Under the new system, a lot of people are going to be contacted by the board about ethics. And I think a lot of it is going to be from supervisees, because now it's spelled out in the code what a supervisor is supposed to do. Okay, so 5.01, when behavior analysts are functioning as supervisor, they must take full responsibility for all facets of this undertaking. Notice that matches the wiki definition. It matches the Canadian definition. It matches the U.S. labor definition as well. Full responsibility, all facets of the undertaking. That's very big, and it's right there. It's the headline. So when somebody says, hey, how would you like to supervise some people? You want to go, let's talk about what that means exactly. You don't want to say, oh, goody, do I get a raise? You want to know, what exactly am I getting into? So here's the subsets. We're going to talk about competence, supervisory volume, delegation, designing effective supervision and training, communication of supervision conditions, providing feedback to supervisors, and my favorite, evaluating the effects of supervision. So all of these now govern what supervisors have to do if they are going to be effective supervisors. So we're going to go through each one of these, and feel free to ask any questions as we do that. If you're going to be a supervisor and you're a behavior analyst supervisor, here's what this would look like, I think. It looks like you would be prompting supervisees to engage in relevant clinical skills. It means that you'd be observing them while they're performing those skills. You would identify whatever they did that's not quite right, that needs improvement. And you would then prioritize this. One of the things that we discovered from our looking at tapes, lots of tapes of different supervisors, supervisees, is that whenever you make any pair, a connection between a supervisor and a supervisee, and you have the supervisor actually start watching closely what the supervisee is doing, it's more than they can keep track of just with a notepad. So we ended up developing a checklist and revising it. We came up with a checklist, which is pretty good, captures most of what they did. And now you're going to meet with, as Michael was describing, you're going to meet with this person and talk about what they need to fix. But you can't talk about all of it because it's overload, because there's just too much to talk about. So the idea is that you've got to look through your notes, your checklist, your data, whatever you've got, and decide, okay, what's the most important thing I've got to fix here? I've got to really make sure I work on that first. And then what's next and what's next? And you have to get some sense of how many things you can work at once. And my guess is that it's probably not more than about 3 things. And if it's something really serious, it might only be 1. So as a supervisor, you have to know what needs to be fixed, and then you have to prioritize those, because now when you go in, it's not just talk about whatever you're thinking of, it's looking at your data and making decisions about what you're going to improve. It's a management system at that point. Then you're going to have to observe them the next opportunity they have to engage in the behavior. You're going to have to do that because you want to see, if you did this, you observed them and gave them their BST on Monday, and the next time you have a chance to look at them is on Wednesday, you got to go look at your notes and say, what did I supposedly fix, and did they fix it? And if they didn't, whatever they didn't fix, that's going to become priority number one. And you may have to stick with that for a few weeks until you get that one fixed, until you can go to something else. So you can see that there's, if you think it through as a sort of a mental experiment, you can begin to see that there's a system that has to be captured here, a system that is based on the data of what the supervisee is doing week to week to week. So you get out to about week 6, presumably you've been through 6 or 8, 10 of these objectives. If something you dealt with on week 1 pops up again, got to put it back in the list. Ditto for week 2, week 3, week 4. So you can see that this is like an ongoing system. It's like a behavior plan for a kid. So you have your objectives and they match them, and you go to the next week and they match them, they go to the next week, whoop, they missed the first week again. You got to go back and start over again. It looks exactly like that. Supervision of trainees, supervisees, looks exactly like a behavior plan for a kid, which means that everybody who is a behavior analyst ought to be able to do this. It's in your repertoire. All you have to do is step it up a level. You're shaping on a different person. So we're going to get into some of those details. Maintenance and generalization is really important. So you know your checklist of what they're supposed to do, you keep constantly monitoring that. You look to see if they're able to generalize from what you taught them to something that's somewhat similar in some way, or maybe to a second client. Some of the supervisees you're working with might have 2 or 3 clients, and you work on a skill with them for client 1, and you might notice that, hey, they generalized to 2. That would be great. And my vision of the future of this particular subfield of supervision is that we would eventually begin to get research on this. We would begin to understand how much generalization do you get over time and over behaviors in these various settings. So here's a question. My question is about my supervisor. I'm a grad student. I work 10 hours a week in a school. I met her on the phone before the first day of my assignment. She asked me a few questions and told me where to meet her a couple of days later in one of the classrooms. Does that sound at all familiar? Anybody see anything wrong with what we got so far? The supervisee, the grad student, met the supervisor on the phone. That's shaky to me. It doesn't sound right. I arrived early for the 1 p.m. meeting and waited, but she never showed. As I was headed to the main office to sign out, my cell rang. So, how did it go? The supervisor wants to know. I told her I was waiting for her, and I didn't do anything since I wasn't sure what to do. I think you can start to see the pattern of what kind of a supervisor we've got. Somebody who doesn't not really internalize the concept of a supervisor as I'm responsible for what's going on here. I heard of this from one of my students. She said, "Oh, I should have mentioned that I was running late. I guess I forgot to call you. Let's try again on Thursday. Just go to the classroom, introduce yourself to the teacher, have her point out Allie. She's the problem child. Gotta run." I heard from her again 2 weeks later, and I asked if she was going to observe me. "No, not now. I've got a lot going on. Just put your supervision papers in my mailbox at school. I'll sign them for you." What do you think?
For a new supervisor.
She needs a new supervisor. this is not a good start to supervision, and it used to just be poor performance on the part of a supervisor. However, because we have a new code coming in January, now this becomes unethical. This is reportable, and something will happen. Now, the touchy part of all of this stuff is a supervisee reporting their supervisor. That's going to be touchy. We don't really know exactly how that's going to work out. We're probably going to have to develop some protocols. We've got some initial things that we're working on about how to approach your supervisor and tell him or her that you don't feel like you've been treated properly, and you just want to let them know that you're reporting them to the board. That is going to be an awkward situation. Yes?
I have another good one online.
Can you speak up? I can't quite hear you.
I have another good one online. So let me turn the mute off here. Okay, so this is a pretty good one from online. Hey, Dr. B.
Hey!
I currently have a caseload of 7 clients and will be up to 9 to 10 soon with any assistance. My employer also wants me to take on 2 BCBA students, but I only feel comfortable with 1 at a time, especially with the new codes. I want to be certain that I'm able to deliver quality services to not only my clients and several RBTs, but to my BCBA supervisees. Is my thinking right? And if so, how do I approach this with my supervisor employer?
So she's correct. And come January, she'll really be correct. I think maybe even in some of the ones that were sent in for today, I think there were some sort of similar to that. I like the position that she's taken, which is I can do 1, but I don't feel like I can do 2. That's very responsible on this person's part. So, kudos for right thinking on that. Now, how do you approach your supervisor and tell them, I don't think I can do that? So, I guess we can do this, can't we? Can we do something where can we give the mic to, you come on up?
You want me to come up?
Yeah.
Oh boy, this is the end. If this happened to me in grad school, my heart would just go. Kobe, let's just
Hello.
So I'm your supervisor, and the person has 7 clients.
7 right now, but it's about to be 9 to 10.
I know you've got 7 clients, and you're doing such a great job with those clients. And
Thank
you know, within this company, the way you get promoted is by taking on additional responsibility. So I've got 2 new trainees I'd like you to take on. What do you think? You think you can do that for us?
I'd love the opportunity to train other people, but given my caseload, I think I prefer to start with 1 and see how it goes, especially with that new code coming out.
Well, we're getting some extra money from the university to take on these 2 students, and as you know, we kind of need the money. I can give you an incentive for doing both of them.
That would be great.
Well, good. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that
Appreciate
was done deal.
it. Have your seat.
Maybe we could lessen my clinical load, and I could take an extra.
Well, now that's where we really make our money, is on those 7 to 9 students. I don't want to get into all of the money matters, but I don't know. Did you see my new BMW in the parking lot?
I parked right next to it.
Yeah, right.
A little bit of a ding on the door. I
Well, it's in
appreciate
your
you guys staying
contract that we can
business.
take some of that out of your monthly pays.
Okay. You're in a tough position. I don't think I can do it though.
What was it about the code?
There's an ethics code apparently
Yeah,
where
But-
you have to act responsibly.
but I mean, this is supervision. This is just, you work for us.
Yeah, I'll
This
email
is-
you a copy.
This is more of like an employer-employee situation.
Yeah. Unfortunately, all of that is apparently governed under the same code. So maybe we can sit down and look through it.
All right. Let's have a hand for Michael. Don't go away. Now we're going to switch roles. Yeah, be sure and talk to the mic.
I'm saying the same thing.
Just, short version.
I know you have 7 or 10 clients, and we're getting a bunch of new money. So I want you to be able to take on a couple supervisees.
Oh, I'd love to do that. I'd love to do that. One is really good. Because, I'm kind of a perfectionist, and those 7 to 9 clients, remember how we started that? You started with 3, and I said, I'm ready for some more, and then we went to 5, and I said, I think I can do a couple more. We got up to 7, so I feel really good about that. This is a new challenge for me, and I understand that the clinical services director might be retiring soon, and I'd really like to move up. I think this is a good chance for me to do that, so I'd love to take on one of these people.
Well, you took on 3 and then 5 and then 7, and during that time, you've really developed some skills that I think would be very nicely applied to these 2 new supervisors you're going to take. So you're on the fast track for that, administration role.
And
So this would be
really,
great for you.
I don't want to. What I don't want to do is disappoint you. And if I took 2, I just have the sense of the way my schedule is. I'm already working 50 hours a week. I only get
It's a good
paid.
start.
I only get paid for 40. My sister's an attorney, and she says 60 hours a week is a standard for attorneys. So I'm working 50, and I think I can add 1 more that would make it about 55 hours. But I don't think I can do 2. 60 hours. I'm not quite ready for 60 hours unless I can get 6-figure salary. Then I
Well,
might be willing to do that.
I'll put you in touch with HR. It's really important that you do take these 2, and we'll help you out a little bit, but you're ready for this. So.
Well,
it's
here's
good.
the thing. I have to take full responsibility for these people. Some of them are kind of rough. I've actually met some of these trainees. They're kind of rough. They need a lot of work.
I hear you.
Yeah, and and according to the new code, I can only take the number that I can supervise effectively, and I don't want to violate the code. Because here's what could happen. Let's say I did 2, and you found my work not good. You could actually report me to the board, and I could lose my certification as a result of that. So for the best of the organization, my own personal, and for you, I think it would be best if I just started with 1, and let me just see if I can do this.
Okay.
Go!
Good.
Say no.
Well, I think I know the best interest of the organization, and it would really be helpful to us, both organizationally and financially, if you did take this extra person. And I know the new ethics code is coming out, but we think that you can handle it, and we think you'll be able to squeeze it in, especially if you did some group supervision. That would kind of lessen the time. And some of the trainees are a little bit rough, but given the experience that you had with those 7 cases that you're on right now, I think you'd be a real benefit to them.
I really didn't want it to come to this, but I guess I'm going to have to say that the point we're at, you're really pushing me for this, is basically you're asking me to violate my code of ethics. And I know you're a BCBA, you used to practice, now you're an administrator. So basically you're asking me to violate the code, and if we keep pushing this, I'm going to have to report you. That's going to be really awkward because you're trying to get me to violate my code of ethics. And the code of ethics, I cherish this code of ethics. This is what's going to make our field whole. And so let's just say 1 is good, and then we don't have to go to the next step. How does that sound?
Well, we've been looking to do some hiring, and we really need people that are kind of willing to push the edges of the
that's
ethics
good.
code.
It's good.
Being it's a new code, we don't know exactly where those boundaries are. It's good to stay busy,
Yeah.
idle hands and all that.
It's interesting that you should talk about hiring because I've gotten job offers just in the last week from another organization. They've guaranteed me that I'll never have to work more than 40 hours a week.
More than 40.
They've guaranteed me, they want to know what I was getting paid. They guaranteed me a 10% increase.
Wow.
So I'm glad you brought that up. I'd like to stay here. I'd like to work with you, but we'll cut right there. Good job. Give that to him. Oh. The final trump card was the one I played at the end, which is, I think you're asking me to violate my code of ethics. I think that'll stop most people. But if they push, as Michael did, because I egged him on, that's where you would say, listen, you're asking me to violate the code, and because you're BCBA, I'd have to report you. Now, if the person pushing you is an MBA, that strategy is not going to work. You're just going to have to stop with, level 4. You're not going to have to go to DevCon 5. But the interesting thing about today's market is that there are lots of jobs out there. Lots of jobs. I get stuff in my mail where they want us to circulate this to our students. I'd say twice a week we're getting job offers. And they're good ones. So there's lots of jobs, at least here in the US of A. Now I don't know about overseas. I don't know what that market looks like. But there's lots of jobs out there. And you're the seller. It's a seller's market. So I would keep that in mind. Right now you have leverage. In a few years that might not be the case. If enough people get trained, if the demand goes down some, it might not be the case. But right now, you really are in control. And so I'd keep that one in my hip pocket if I were you. Do you want to discuss whatever those questions were? Or move on, or?
Let me bring up the latest. Doesn't the BACB allow the supervision of RBTs by BCABAs?
Not to my knowledge.
And this one's pretty good. Before someone becomes a trainee, are there evidence-based variables that we could identify to hire people during interviews, like some important questions which could be precursors of appropriate behaviors?
You'd be working off of a couple things. One is whatever you could find out about their history would be like from their previous employer. But then the rest of it's going to be their verbal behavior, what they say to you. And we've got about 30 years of research on verbal self-report that shows that it's not very accurate. I think really the best test, if you're going to think of it in terms of a test, is to put them in a simulated setting and see what they do. Now there are some things that you can test for, like you could give them an IEP that you have dummied up and put in stuff that's not right. And you could give that to them and ask them to critique it. Give them 10 or 15 minutes and a red pen and say, so go through this. That's something that's done in business settings. It's called a inbox exercise, where you give the person one task after another. And there's down at the University of Central Florida, they have a big lab there, and they do this for companies. And they simulate whatever the tests are, and the person's actually sitting at a desk. There's a phone on the desk. There is an inbox on the desk. There's a computer and so on. And you give the person something to do, and then you make sure that somebody in the other room calls them on the phone. So now they're distracted, and they're under pressure to produce whatever you told them to do, but they have to answer the phone at the same time. And then the person hangs up, and their supervisor walks in and says, was that for me? And I mean, so you're really testing their ability to handle stressful sorts of situations. But if you're looking for how well a person handles clients, I think you'd sort of have to see it. Many, many years ago, when I was hiring babysitters for my kids, I would invite them to the house, and I would introduce them to the kids, and I'd just kind of step back and see what they did. Some of them didn't know what to do. They were just a college kid looking for some extra money. And some of them knew exactly what to do. Immediately sat on the floor, picked up some toys, started engaging. I knew that was great. There was only one hitch. The person who did that was 30 minutes late. So I had to invite somebody else, because it's a behavior test. If I tell you, come to this place, be prepared to interact with my kids, and you need to be there at 1:30, you can't come at 1:40 or 1:50, because on any given day, I'm going to be counting on them to be on time. And I could tell that they'd been reinforced for making excuses. So people that can't keep things straight come up with really good ideas about why they couldn't. And somebody said, oh, well, I understand, yes. Your grandmother died, but didn't she just die a couple months ago? Oh, no, it was my grandfather. Right. Now I don't have any grandparents. Oh, that's really sad. But the idea is a behavior test of some kind that would have some more likelihood of doing this. And we admit students to our program based on GRE, GPA, stuff like that. But really, I think when all is said and done, the best indicator for us is the hands-on experience they had prior to coming to grad school, what they did, how they wrote about it, and then sometimes we'll call the person who wrote the letter and say, tell me more. So somewhere around in there, that's about the best I can do for now.
Do you have time for a couple more?
Sure.
So this one's kind of just a comment, but you might want to comment further. And
you're editing these, right?
Yeah, I'm editing
Okay,
this
good.
one. And I'm going to paraphrase this one because it's really long. But
Okay.
the gist of it was kind of related to the intensity of supervision and doing it face-to-face and so forth. You wanted a question with kind of an international flavor.
Yeah.
And they said in a country like India, the availability of BCBAs is almost non-existent. And so a lot of supervision is provided remotely. And they don't even have the opportunity to do it face to face. And if that was something that they had to do, they'd lose all of their supervision. They wouldn't be able to do it. So I think the point sort of relates to resources. So if it's just non-existent, is it appropriate to, do that sort of supervision that's not ideal here?
I think under those circumstances, the rule would be do the best you can. Operate in good faith, do the best you can, and if the resources change, shift to the better resource. I've actually spent some time on the phone with people in India, and we talked about that. And if they can get enough training going, at some point, 3 or 4 years from now, they will have some people they can do it live, which would be better. So I think that would be it. And if somebody talked to them about, wait, you're not really doing live supervision, you'd have to say, I'm doing the best I can. Are you going to report me for this? Because then the whole thing gets shut down. And I suspect, I'm not speaking for the board, but I suspect they're rational people, and they would say, we understand. We understand for now.
I just wanted to comment about the remote, the remote part. There's so many different levels with the technology that we have. If it's somebody on the phone, that's different than if they're actually watching them,
Yes.
live streaming video, those type things. So is that addressed at all in?
No,
Okay.
it's not. I think what we need is, there's almost no research. There's very little research on remote supervision using like a telemedicine model. Telemedicine works because you can look, you know what the symptoms are. You can have somebody on site. You're in Omaha, and they're in Schenectady or something, and But there's a nurse there who's taking temps and doing vitals, and so it's almost like being there. I had a doctor that acted like he was somewhere else. But he was right there. But he just spent all his time looking over here, and I had to fire him. But what we need, here's what we need. We need really good research on this. There's a couple commercial systems that are out there that are being used for supervision, and I just had recently occasion to look into this to see, okay, is it published yet? I don't see it. Dave Wacker's got some stuff out of Iowa, but that's just the scratching the surface. It's just like that scratch on my BMW. It just scratched the surface of what needs to be done. And so we're not there yet. I suspect that the board is going to be lenient until we begin to have some research that shows whether or not it works, and if so, what are the circumstances under which it works. You have to think about this in a worst case scenario. Worst case scenario is that there are lives at risk here. You're watching a screen and you're seeing a therapist working with a kid, and you feel good that that's the right thing to do. What you don't see is what happens when the camera goes off. And if there's all kinds of other stuff going on, you don't know about it, it goes haywire, and it's on you. The person on the other end, the person watching the screen, the supervisor, is responsible for what happens out there in Schenectady or Omaha or whatever it is. And right now, people are not treating it as though they're responsible. They're treating it as, God, this is cool. I don't have to drive all over the place anymore. I can just sit in my office. I think we have to have more reseach on that. Is that enough?
How about one more?
One more, okay, go ahead.
And you might want a legal disclaimer before this one. We've actually considered having interviewees interact with kids. But is that okay regarding HIPAA? Should the parents of the kids have to sign something?
Sure.
So presumably these aren't actual employees yet. They're interviewing.
The parents would have to sign a release saying that they know that the kids will be interacting with guests, potential employees, let's say, and describe what they're going to be doing. And what they would be doing can't be intrusive. Putting a kid in timeout, doing toilet training, feeding training, it can't be any of that kind of stuff. It's got to be much lighter so that there's no harm. You've got to bear in mind, do no harm. So the extent to which they can create a situation like that, sort of like what I did with my potential babysitters, and that they're being supervised. You don't just leave them in a room. I think the extent to which that can be done. We know that it can be done. I don't know did you watch Dr. Milton Berger on, was it ABC, about 6 months ago with his stuff with gun safety? Yeah, so they got clearance from those parents. They had camera people around, the rooms were wired and everything. They got clearance from those parents. They obviously signed releases saying, we're going to allow your child to be around firearms. They won't be loaded. And in fact, they'll be fixed in such a way that they can't be loaded and they can't be fired. But your child will be exposed to firearms. And apparently these parents signed all these releases because they did that. Because I wouldn't even think you could get parents to sign on to something crazy like that. But they did. And it was, you ought to look it up. It's probably on YouTube. You can look it up Milton Berger gun safety. So I know that there are circumstances under which parents will be willing to allow their kids to participate in experiments. And this is not exactly experiment, what we're talking about here, because it's not controlled, looking at new people. But I don't think that would be outrageous. Ready?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, here's a question from a supervisor now, looking at it from the other end. I got a call from the principal at a school where one of my first-year grad student supervisees is doing her practicum. She said that this individual kicked one of the third-grade children and wanted to know what I was going to do about it. The parents have been called and want to meet with me. I wasn't there. I don't know the child. I've not seen the grad student in several weeks. Am I responsible for this mess? Shouldn't they be talking to the grad student? This is not my fault, is it? Who gets to talk to the parents? The supervisor gets to talk to the parents, right? And it could be that the facts are not totally straight, which is, there's going to have to be some kind of investigation here to find out about whether the person was kicked or threatened to be kicked or whatever the details are. But that'll give you some idea what that looks like from the other end of the stick, so to speak. All right, we're going through the code. 5.01, supervisory competence, behavior analysts supervise only within their area of defined competence. Now, the extent to which we have a new code, freshly minted, well thought out, carefully crafted. We had English majors in the room when we were working on this. It's all been vetted by an attorney. However, competence, defined competence, is not operationally defined. Furthermore, we don't really know what competence is. How do we know if you're competent in a certain area? I think that a competent behavior analyst is somebody who has the knowledge, skills, and ability to perform a routine task in certain areas. So if you graduate from our master's program, and probably a lot of master's programs, I think that you ought to have these skills in your repertoire. You ought to know how to do DTT. You ought to know how to manage off-task, self-stim type behaviors. You ought to know a lot about classroom management and token economies. You ought to be able to consult with DD clients in home settings and residential settings. And you ought to be able to deliver standard autism services and should be able to handle routine supervision tasks. I think that would be the accepted competence of a master's level person coming from one of our, 100 or so programs around the world. I think you ought to be able to do those standard things. Now, your boss says, hey, we've got a new client for you. Got a little bit of SIB, how do you feel about that? And the new trainee says, a little bit. I know a little bit about SIB. Yeah, I know a little bit about that. Okay, well, good. This is your new client. Now, he does bite himself, and he's actually bitten some other kids, but he'll bite himself. He's drawn blood, not too much blood. You can fix it with a Band-Aid. So what do you think about this? Now, the new master's student, fresh out, knows how to do these things, but SIB is not on that list, and certainly not SIB that involves breaking the skin and blood. When you cross that barrier and you get into blood, things change a lot, because you have bloodborne diseases and the possibility of those spreading and so on. I think this is standard competence for a master's degree person. So I have any new master's people in the room? Does this sound like this is roughly what you got to do when you were a master's student? Most master's programs are only a couple years, and so they can't train you to do everything, but they got to treat you in the basics. And the assumption is we're going to put you out there, we're going to put you in the world, and you're going to have some assignments, you're going to have some supervisors, and if somebody says we want you to take on this SIB case, and you're a new student, you've got to say, who's going to supervise me on that? Well, I thought you didn't need supervision, you're a BCBA. Well, no, see, I don't know anything much about SIB. I'll need somebody. Who on staff do we have who is an expert on SIB that can talk me through this and help me until I feel comfortable with it? Who is that person? Well, we don't have anybody like that. That's where you get into the question of competence and defined competence. Supervisee assigned to work with a client with a life-threatening feeding disorder, dangerous self-injurious behavior. Not only therapists may not be competent in the case, but the supervisor could also fall short because those skills are not in wide availability. So let's say they want you to take on a child with a feeding disorder. I would say defined competence relative to that is you've been specifically trained in feeding disorder. So here's one place that I guess you could go, the Pediatric Feeding Disorder Program at Kennedy Krieger. There's also one at Hershey Hospital in Hershey, PA. I would think if somebody wants to give you that kind of an assignment, you'd say, great, I'll call them up and see if they'll take me. Do you mind if I'm gone for a couple months, 3 months? And you're going to foot the bill, and then I promise I'll come back. I won't jump the ship and go to someplace else. I will, if you need me to sign something saying I come back, I'll sign it. I'd be happy to. But I don't feel competent taking on a feeding disorder client without having had specific competence training in that area. Ditto for SIB. You got serious SIB? Kennedy Krieger, they have an SIB program there. University of Florida, Bryan-Awada, a couple of other places. I would say you either have to bring somebody in or you got to go there, but otherwise you got to be very careful about taking these on. So let's just run a quick scenario. Let's say you're a new BCBA. They want you to take this case. You want to prove something to your administration that you can do this. You take it on. Let's play a little game. And the game is called Worst Case Scenario. You ever played Worst Case Scenario? My life consists of analyzing worst case scenarios. So what's the worst case scenario? You take on a kid who has strong food preferences, and the parents want the kid to eat meat, and the kid just got off a tube, and this is your case. What's the worst case scenario? Kid chokes and dies. The kid chokes and dies, and you are the person who wrote this program and supervised this program. Now, it's certainly the worst case for the kid and for the family. And an even worse case than all of this would probably be if the family consisted of 2 attorneys. That would really be the worst case, because you'd probably be talking 5 to 10. You're going to go up the river. You were totally negligent in doing this. You're going to maybe write a book someday about what it's like to spend 5 years in prison as a behavior analyst. So you really have to think about what you could get into. Ditto for SIB. I think that's another area where these things are touchy with regard to taking them on. So I think that you have to do something like this. You have to go somewhere, somebody has to come and train you, and you ought to have something when you get done with that. You ought to have a certificate or something that says you finished whatever this work is. You did an internship there, and then I would say your competence is defined by the experience you had and the paperwork that you've got. If you've been trained by somebody who's a known expert, they supervised you, they signed off on you, you're defined competent. Right now, in our field, we don't have much of that. We have a little bit of that, but really not enough to speak of. People that come out of Bryan-Awada's lab have lots of experience with SIB, and they often get hired specifically to do SIB work. They ought to be able to train you in how to do something like that. So I think defined competence would look something like that. It's not in the code. If we have some situations come up I think that a revision of the code, and the code gets revised about every 5 years. Within 5 years, there might be some more language in there about what defined competence consists of. Maybe there'll be more agreement at that point. PICA, there's another example of something which is a specialty area. You can be held responsible if something bad happens to your client. If you think about the general areas, classroom management, DTT, verbal behavior training, all that kind of stuff, what's the worst case? The kid emits a tact instead of a mand. It's like, well, okay, we're okay. We can fix this. You mess up somewhere else, it's not going to be life-threatening. You run a token economy in a classroom, what's the worst case? Well, the worst case is the kid eats the token and dies. It always ends up with death somehow. 5 years in prison, well, the whole thing. But you would think that through, and you'd know whether or not the kids are likely to swallow these things you're going to use as tokens, and so you would have it be checks on a piece of paper or something. You would do the right thing. You'd know to do that. You'd know to be careful. You'd know to be safe. PICA. Anybody worked with PICA? That can be very tricky. It starts with cleaning out an environment, usually, of all the stuff that could be swallowed. But let's say you forgot to look behind the desk. And sure enough, the kid swallows an eraser that somebody dropped. Not going to be good.